Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning into another Supatease video. And by the end of this one, you will know if Fury Warrior is a good pick for you. We're going to be doing a Fury Warrior PvP review. I wanted to give it a try now since I got a second two-hander. Fury Warrior relative to Arms Warrior is a single target juggernaut. You're basically just going to be tunneling one target down for almost the entirety of the game. Now, this does come with some drawbacks, as many healing specializations, particularly Resto Druids, which are, debatably the most powerful healer at the moment, deal with single target damage really effectively. So you're going to feel much weaker in those types of matchups. Your crowd control is also pretty limited, so it can feel difficult to get pressure against Mistweaver monks. However, when you are tunneling down classes like Warlocks and Shadow Priests, these clothy classes, you will feel like a monster, really powerful, and just absolutely running them down. So in these types of situations, like in round number 1, I felt like an absolute titan, just training down this Warlock until eventually he falls down into the dirt. So if this is the type of situation that you're really struggling with, Fury Warrior is definitely going to be able to highlight and deal with that more effectively. Now, where you start to struggle as a Fury Warrior is situations like this, where it's double melee DPS. I felt it was much harder to get pressure, even with it being a Death Knight. I think this is because you do mostly physical damage through Bloodthirst and not so much like Ren damage from Arms Warriors, and you don't have the Warbreaker cooldown. It's much harder against high armor targets and much harder against healers that either you don't have CC for, like my Warlock and my Warrior. We don't have much CC for this Mistweaver, and single target damage against Resto Druids, for example, is very weak. So these situations will make you feel weaker. We're going to tunnel down the Death Knight and see what we can get done. Our main goal in this lobby is to protect our caster. We have tools like Intervene to redirect damage. We have tools like Stormbolt and Shockwave in order to stun melee attackers and keep them from their target, and Piercing, Howl, and Hamstring. So we get a double Shockwave here on both the Death Knight and the Warrior. We're going to pop our cooldowns while they're stunned and unable to trade cooldowns in that position, and continue to truck down the Death Knight, as he's going to be a bit easier to kill. When the healer is near me, I'm going to toss out an Intimidating Shout so I don't need to use any mobility, and continue to just truck down damage onto the Death Knight. And you can see it's creating quite a bit of pressure. I like using my Stormbolt onto the healer and my Shockwave onto the melee DPS against melee cleaves. I feel like this is a good way to try and shore up the weaknesses of Fury Warrior, where you don't have much crowd control for the healer and still have some defense for your caster or your team in general to protect them against double melee. We're using Charge Root and Hamstring, just trying to keep pressure going onto the Death Knight, but you can see with no crowd control, it is very difficult to actually get pressure on the Death Knight. And another major issue, and I would honestly say flaw with the specialization, is that your Slaughterhouse stacks of Mortal Wounds that stack up every time you rampage don't supersede other Mortal Strike effects. So this Demonology Warlock, his pet is applying Mortal Strike, but it's a very weak version of Mortal Strike, and mine would be 40%, but won't stack at all because his pet's already stacked a weaker version of it that's slightly better than your 0 stacked version of your MS. And this is a really frustrating mechanic, because that's the main thing that could help Fury Warrior in these situations where you don't have a lot of CC, is being able to stack up your MS. But if you're playing with a class that has one, I mean, honestly, I should probably unspec it and gone something else, but without it, you're going to feel really useless. Like you can see right now in round number 2, it's really tough to get any sort of pressure going against the Mistweaver monk. We're going to leap over for a fear. We get a stun. We're getting good cross CC. We're trying to charge back to our target. We got Dragon Roar. We got Recklessness. We could do a lot of damage here because these bleeds are going to actually cut through the high armor. This is one of the few moments where you can, and we do ultimately net a kill with that chain of crowd control. But outside of those windows, it was really difficult to get any pressure, and those were the main gripes. So you've got to be really focused on chain crowd control against healers like Mistweaver for what you've got, which is Intimidating Shout and Stormbolt, and even off pummels and such. And these are going to be the main tools for you to be able to kind of deal with that single target healing and lack of crowd control that you have. Now we've got another situation, which is the Warlock and the Arms Warrior and the Resto Druid. So again, tunneling the Warlock is likely going to be the big plan here. Swapping targets is really rough. Now you can cleave. So by going Warlock, you're likely going to get the Warrior next to you, so you can AoE them a little bit with Whirlwind and Odin's Fury Cleave and Dragon Roar Cleave. But like hard swapping can be very difficult. You're going to lose all of your stacks. This will be much better now that we have a Death Knight who doesn't have MS, so we're going to be able to get our stacks. We can see that at 4, it's already at 8. It's about to get to 12 in just a second. And at that 12 stack, this is really what helps combat like Resto Druids being really powerful single target healers. You're reducing their healing by 40%, and you can see that pressure on the Warlock as he's just hovering below 50% health for most of the opener on this game. game. When Warlocks use their portal with Soulburn, they get a freedom effect. And what I've learned is the best way to deal with this is to not chase them until that freedom effect has ended. So as you can see, I leaped at the Warlock, but because he's unsnarable, I'm not even going to be able to get back to him, and I just lose my leap until I have a charge, until I can get in range to actually get back to him. So generally, it's better to just let the Warlock run around with that freedom and then leap Piercing Hour, leap Hamstring after it. Healer's nearby, so I'm going to toss out a Fear. This is always really effective to do, so you can save your mobility to stay on target. You get a double Shockwave on the DPS. That's like a very standard, effective offensive strategy to get maximum value out on the Fury Warrior. We have swapped targets here, and it's mostly because the Warlock ported. He's too far away from me. I can't get to him. So we're getting stacks on the Warrior, trying to force hot swaps over before we are able to charge back to the Warlock as he gets into range. We go for Odin's Fury, trying to reset our rage bar. It's really important that you're juggling your rage effectively. Basically, you would not want to use Odin's Fury or Recklessness when you're at full rage, because it's going to generate you a rage bar. And then when you spend that rage bar, it's going to give you 4 stacks of mortal wounds. So you never want to be overlapping those rage bars. We do have a lot of self-healing with Victory Rush and Bloodthirst. You want to be using those basically on cooldown whenever you are taking damage. We're moving towards the Warlock, trying to get our Hamstring back up. Warrior's peeling me a bit, making it difficult to stay on target. And this is one of the hardest parts about being Fury Warrior honestly at the moment, is when you've got like a strength 2-handed class, like a warrior an arms warrior on your back, chasing you down, snaring you and preventing you from going in. It can feel very difficult to get pressure, but against those casters, you will feel very strong and very powerful. So this is a spec where at lower ratings, you're going to feel much weaker. And then as you get to the higher level of the ladder, if you're able to avoid mages, which are really difficult to deal with, you're going to feel a lot better at that range. But Shadow Priests aren't really meta at the moment, so Fury is honestly falling down. I may have ranked it a little bit too high on my tier list, which is why I wanted to do a deep dive on it and explore like what exactly is going on with Fury. We've got good defensive measures. We're leaping away defensively, trying to figure out the DPS, reflecting Star Surges from the Druid, trying to get line of sight of our healer. You do have some wiggle room, although it is quite a simple spec. So if you're looking for something that's just really straightforward in terms of doing damage, it's going to be really useful for you. It's also really low keybind density in that sense, with a little bit of wiggle room to make plays with things like Intervene and Heroic Leap. Like right here, I intervened the Death Knight and stopped him dying for like an extra few seconds, but the Mistweaver was just struggling a little bit too much and not able to pick him up. So it's got this nice kind of beginner area for specialization, but unfortunately, at beginner levels of rating, you're likely to fight specializations that are going to be really difficult for you to deal with. Things like the Arms Warrior, the Ret Paladin, these plate classes, high armor targets. It's going to be very difficult to deal with at low rating, so I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. I honestly have had more fun on Arms Warrior, and I feel like Arms Warrior is more multiversed, if that's even a word, at dealing with more situations, and it has better synergy, and the ability to swap targets is just really important right now. Even with me running the 4-piece on Fury, which it did feel a lot better. It's a lot stronger than it has been in previous patches. I still don't think it's probably going to reach the level of where Arms is. We're going to jump in right away and start getting a lot of cleave. I just want to try and get them away from my Warlock and get as much pressure out as possible before they've even really started the game. That's my main goal here in this round. So we leap in with a Piercing Howl, double Shockwave, try and get as much damage out as possible, but they basically just completely walk it off. And this is where the problem with our MS stacking comes in. That Warlock Pet is hitting the Death Knight, which means I can't stack up my Slaughterhouse, and without Slaughterhouse, it's going to be really rough to be able to really get any damage going. But we're actually still getting a surprising amount of pressure even despite that. We'll intervene the Warlock because he's low health. And imagine if I had Slaughterhouse here, right? Fury would feel way better. So if they could do something about the coding on Slaughterhouse so that Slaughterhouse, no matter what, will replace an existing mortal wounds effect on the target no matter how many stacks is at, because at 4 stacks it's the weakest MS, but at 12 it's the strongest mortal strike aside from Sharpened Blade. So if there was a way to individually code Slaughterhouse to always replace any other existing mortal strike effect regardless if it's stronger or weaker, it would help Fury Warrior a lot in terms of competitive play. That would be like my recommendation to a designer if I could make one, even though it doesn't follow consistently with the other trends of how Mortal Strike works. This is really the only way I can see Fury Warrior having a fair shot in these types of situations, because something like a Demonology Warlock can't even spec out of that Mortal Wounds. Some classes you can ask them to. If you get like a Demon Hunter, you could say, hey, unspec out of your Mortal Strike. And Feral Druids, things like this. There are classes where they can untalent it, but things like Demonology Warlock have to play with a Felguard, and they have to have MS. And this has been like one of the most frustrating parts of Fury Warrior in PvP in my mind. even since the beginning of the expansion that I can remember. But since I've been jumping back on it here to try and get this review for you guys, that has been the main problem for it. So advantages is that it's low keybinds. So if you're really new and you don't like keybinds, it's going to be one of the best specs to be able to do that. Really straightforward rotation, just hit the buttons that light up, spend your rage as you get it. Very basic level of crowd control with fear for healers and stuns for damage dealers or for healers. Not like a huge amount of strategy is going to have to be put into this. It's much more oriented around Zug. It's kind of like playing Rock'em Sock'em Robots a little bit. So if you want that simplified gameplay, it's definitely going to deliver it to you with a little bit of level of advancement with cool tools like Piercing Howl Root and Intervene to redirect attacks to yourself or important stuns at critical moments. You're going to have a little bit of wiggle room to do that. So it's a nice beginner intermediate specialization, but I would not say that it is entirely remarkably strong, except for very niche situations. And that's basically my review for the Fury Warrior. So if you enjoyed this video and it got you some useful information, make sure to hit the subscribe button. Let me know in the comments down below what type of content you would like to see in the future. And other than that, thank you very much for watching the video. I will see you in the next one.